I recently sold my 2016 Mustang GT, more on that later, and I've very much been missing a fun car. After a lot of searching and what car should I buy next spreadsheets, I settled on a car that I've always lusted after ever since it was introduced, a BMW M2. I kept an eye on all the auction sites, most going for higher than I wanted to pay, but ultimately I found a car listed for sale on Facebook located in San Diego. So I hopped on a plane, a train, and ultimately purchased this automobile. This is a 2016 BMW M2. So this is the original M2 before they made the comps, before they made the CSs, and I really quite like it. It makes about 365 horsepower from a non-M engine. It's an N55 engine, which is the same as that they put in the 335s, slightly tuned differently, but ultimately the same engine. And what I like about it is that it's rear-wheel drive, it has a turbocharged 6-cylinder inline engine, and most importantly, I'll show you what's on the interior. This right here, to me, might be the most important part of the equation. See, if you want to go around a racetrack fast, sure, the latest automatic transmission, dual clutch transmissions, PDK transmissions are going to get you around faster. But if you want to have the most fun and have the best experience in a sports car, for me, it's got to be a manual transmission. So this car has a 6-speed manual transmission. And what's interesting about the M2, at least the original M2, in 2016, 2017, 2018, the take rate on the manual was about 50% in North America, which I think is quite interesting, being that we kind of think that manual transmissions are going away and that most people prefer the automatic, which, don't get me wrong, in most cars that is the case. But it's nice to know that something about the M2 leads it and really lends its hand to a manual transmission. Now, outside of it being a rear-wheel drive, turbocharged 6-cylinder with a manual, what I really like about this car is that it's the right size, just about dimensionally very similar to the E46 M3. And the other part that I really like about it is just how simple it is. This is the era of BMW interiors where things are quite simple. There's not a lot of screens, there's not a lot of gimmicks. It's just a nice gauge cluster with some nice dials, a very simple to use interface, and it just works. Now that I've bought the car, of course, I need to get it home. And as much as I'd love to spend more time in SoCal, I have to get back before I start work. So time to hit the road. But on the way, I'm gonna let you in on a little more details about the M2 and also why I ended up selling my Mustang to get this car. Just like the street lights lit this. After visiting some friends in Los Angeles, it was time to start the 1,000-mile trip back to Colorado. Other than just heat, there's plenty to find on the road between LA and Las Vegas, some of which includes total lawlessness and a semi-burnt to a crisp. But the true beauty of this journey starts near the intersection of Nevada, Arizona, and Utah. Let's talk about this deal and this whole trip. The first thing that's worth mentioning is huge shout out to the previous owner, Christian, and his family. He's just been a pleasure to work with. As I mentioned, I found this car on Facebook, and from the moment I contacted him, it's just been on the up and up. He's been super upfront about everything and just really made this a very enjoyable experience, but also just how well he cared for the car. He really adored this thing. And after only driving it for a few hours, I understand why. Like there's sometimes cars are better than the sum of their parts. And that's not to say that this has bad parts by any means. Like it's really good. It's made up of really good bones. But when you look at it on paper, 365 horsepower, N55 engine, so it's not the actual M Motorsports engine. There's just some things that seem like, it wouldn't be that special, but it just is. And certain cars have that it factor where it feels special to drive and it's more than just your regular car. And this absolutely has it. It's interesting to me because I owned an M235i and I was concerned that it was going to be too similar to that. And I was kind of like, why am I essentially buying a very same or similar car to one that I had? I don't like to repeat cars. I like to experience new cars. But I mean, just immediately driving it, this car is so much different than the M235i, way more than I expected. Specifically, the front suspension and the steering is what sets this car so far away from the M235i. It is so sharp to turn in. The rack is extremely fast. It feels completely different to the M235i, which ultimately I guess makes sense because they stuck the entire M3 front suspension and steering on these cars. And that's why they have these like much wider stance. So front end grip and turn in can completely transform a car, and that's exactly what this car has compared to the M235i. The other difference I notice is the most M235is, unless you like optioned it from the factory, do not have a mechanical limited slip differential, and these all do, of course, from the factory, and that makes a big difference. Just with these super torquey turbocharged engines, on that last car I had, it would just spin one wheel all the time, and this one is just so much more hooked up, front and rear, frankly. So I've absolutely really been enjoying it. It's in fantastic shape. As I mentioned, Christian took really good care of the car. The previous owners clearly took care of the car. It's a clean title, no accidents, any of that kind of stuff. And the other part was, for me, I really like that blue. Like everyone likes the blue in this car because it's a beautiful color. I believe it's Laguna blue or something like that. But by the numbers, they made the most M2s in Laguna blue. Once again, beautiful color, but I sort of like to have cars that are at least slightly more unique. You don't see M2s everywhere. You see them occasionally, and I see way more blue ones than I see white ones. So I am in some ways happy that I got the white. It still looks good on this car. So I paid $37,000 for this car, which I think is a pretty good deal. It has 43,000 miles on it, and I was looking at some lower mileage examples that were going for like mid 40s. There was one on Cars and Bids that just went for, I believe, 45 plus fees. And that was a little too much for me, but I think in the upper 30s, this is just a absolutely fantastic car. It has that special quality. It's fast enough. It's by no means slow, but it's fast enough to be fun. But it's also just has this short wheelbase, like twitchy, razor edge character about it that I really like. So I will be doing a full review on this car, so we don't need to get into all the nitty-gritty details of dynamics, but as an overall buying experience and overall traveling experience, at least so far, it's been super enjoyable. As we wind our way through Utah, and I don't know if you can see in the background, but it is absolutely gorgeous here. It's worth bringing up why I chose this over a Mustang, or why I should say I sold my Mustang in order to get this car. Now, somewhat of an unfair comparison being that there is a bit of a price difference, although when you start to look at comparable miles to miles and year to year, it is actually quite close. My Mustang was extremely high miles, at like 85,000 miles. It was a 2016 S550, so the independent rear suspension model, the one that was known for being a little better handling. It really boiled down mostly for me to the build quality. I mean, the elephant in the room with that is, you get in this car, you get into a Mustang, and even though this is the lowest trim, at least at the time, BMW you could buy, it is just so much better built. Like, it's so much more solid. The materials are significantly higher quality, and you could really tell that, and not just the touch of the materials in each car. You don't have to like go and touch the dash to understand this. You would just look at how the Mustang was wearing. The center console was all rough. The seats, the seats looked like they had been driven in for 300,000 miles. I mean, it's just unbelievable the level of just crap that Ford puts in a lot of their products. And when you see the CEO who recently came out and said they're going to put a huge emphasis on QC going forward. Whenever you see a CEO say that, obviously that leads you to believe that there are currently problems. And by the numbers, Ford has the most recalls over any other manufacturer. I think Ford makes some amazing products, some like really appealing and interesting products between all the Raptor lineup and all the Mustangs, the Ford GT. They make some amazing vehicles, but the quality control is just not there, and that really wears on you in a driving experience. Now, the other thing that wore on me is really my fault. I purchased a highly modified Mustang, at least one that had, all the suspension goodies done to it. Now, that made it handle amazing on a back road. Like, it was incredible how capable that car was. But even though it had very expensive dampers, it was heinous to drive on the street that was anything other than glass. Like, unless you had a super smooth road, it was just the worst. And when a vehicle is like that and unenjoyable to drive at low speeds and just like a regular setting, it just makes you not want to drive it. So that was partially my fault. I could have, of course, turned it back to stock, but there was so much money spent in that car. The suspension alone, like the coilover setup itself, was $5,000. That doesn't count any of the other control arms or other suspension goodies that it had. So I felt weird returning it to stock, because for the right person that wanted to track it all the time or just do windy roads or maybe live by really good roads, it was a great car. The obvious advantage in the Mustang is that Coyote V8. Coyote V8 is not only faster than this car, it sounds better, it revved amazing, just fantastic engine. And that's really why you buy the Mustang, right? You're really just like buying an engine and then everything else comes free. So that part I really miss. And they're known for being pretty darn reliable. For as much as abuse as they get, they're known for being pretty reliable. So that is one thing that I do miss from the Mustang, but as an overall package, especially this engine, this N55, is certainly no slouch. But in a straight line, of course, the Mustang is going to be faster. And really, the other aspect that I like about the M2 versus the Mustang is really the size. That's actually a really big factor for me. When you start getting into really big sports cars, obviously there's additional weight, but just having extra room in your lane to place the car or maneuver the car or whatever it may be can make a really big difference. It may not look as big on paper, numbers wise, as it feels to drive, because this feels so much smaller to drive, and it certainly feels lighter to drive too. Now, sure, it is, but once again, marginally, and these marginal differences actually add up to being quite a bit different. So the last thing I'll say, going back to quality control, if I haven't mentioned it before, my Mustang, the transmission went out on it. Going back to quality control, the MT82 transmission is just a really poorly built transmission, and it is more a matter of when than if it will inevitably disintegrate. So sometimes they catastrophically fail if you put a lot of power through them. In my case, I wasn't putting out that much more power than stock, and it was more a case of the synchros were going. So every time I shifted into third, it grinded. And that, you know, third gear you use all the time, right? So that part made it super annoying to drive that car. So for all these reasons, the M2 for me was a better buy. And also, you see less M2s, and to me that's worth something. They make a lot of Mustangs. They're great cars, do not get me wrong. They appeal to a lot of people, but I kind of like that the M2 is slightly more exclusive. By no means a rare car, but you see a lot less of them than Mustangs. So I wanted to provide a little clarity as far as why I sold that Mustang. And no hate to Mustang owners. Like I mentioned, great cars, and once again, partially my own fault for buying a modified one. I really should have bought one that was closer to stock and probably been more happy. All right, I've killed about 1 million bugs, but I made it home. Car did great. Really appreciate you guys watching. I'm now in Colorado, so that's good news for everyone who has stayed with the channel, and I really appreciate all the kind words when I got to 100,000 subscribers. There are a fleet of press vehicles in Colorado, specifically Denver, so we'll start to get more videos coming back to the channel on a more regular basis. So appreciate you guys hanging in there. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, would love to hear a comment below, and you'll see more of this car in the future. But now I'm going to spend about an hour trying to get all these bugs off the front of the car. I'll see you guys later. Peace.